The day my father's will was read, my daughter didn't cry. Everyone else did. My stepmother dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. My cousins sniffled loudly in the back row of the attorney's office. Even I felt the weight of it pressing against my ribs, the finality of a man larger than life reduced to paperwork and legal signatures. But Emily sat still beside me, spine straight, lips pressed tight, her expression unreadable. She was 23, brilliant, stubborn, and lately angry. I should have paid more attention to that anger. The attorney cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. To my son, Daniel Whitmore, I leave the controlling share of Whitmore Biotech, along with the personal sum of $52 million issued by certified check. A quiet gasp rippled through the room. Emily's jaw tightened. My father had built Whitmore Biotech from a two-room research lab into a pharmaceutical powerhouse. I'd spent years at his side, learning every molecule, every negotiation, but Emily had always felt distant from it all. She accused me more than once of caring about the company more than I cared about her. When the attorney slid the envelope across the table, I hesitated before opening it. The check was thick, heavy, embossed with the bank's seal. $52 million. My father's final gesture. I didn't feel triumph. I felt responsibility. Emily stood abruptly. "So that's it?" she asked. The room fell silent. "That's what Grandpa thought you deserved." I frowned. "Emily. He always said money corrupts people, always, but now he just hands you $52 million like it's nothing." My stepmother shifted uncomfortably. The attorney cleared his throat again. "Your grandfather believed in your father," he said gently. Emily's eyes flashed. "Of course he did." She walked out before I could stop her. 3 days later, the check was gone. Burned. I found the ashes in the fireplace of our living room. At first, I thought someone had tossed in old mail, but then I saw the corner, a fragment of thick security paper, the faint trace of numbers still visible beneath charred edges. My stomach dropped. "Emily," I called. She came down the stairs slowly, barefoot, wearing one of her oversized sweaters. She didn't look panicked. She looked defiant. "What did you do?" My voice sounded strangely calm. She crossed her arms. "I fixed something." "You burned it?" "Yes." $52 million, reduced to smoke. "You think I didn't see what that money was doing to you?" she demanded. "You were already different, more distant, calculating." "It was a check, Emily. It was temptation." I stared at the blackened remains in the fireplace. I should have felt rage, I should have shouted. Instead, something unexpected rose inside me. Relief. And then a smile. Emily blinked. "Why are you smiling?" "Because," I said quietly, "you have no idea what you really destroyed." She thought she had destroyed my inheritance. She hadn't. My father was many things: brilliant, ruthless in business, cautious to the point of paranoia. He never trusted paper. The check had been symbolic. The real inheritance had never been about that $52 million. 2 weeks before his death, he'd asked me to visit him alone at the hospital. Machines beeped steadily around his bed. His once commanding voice was thinner, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Daniel," he said, "money is leverage, but control, that's power." I assumed he meant the company shares. He shook his head faintly. "Not the board, not the patents, the future." He handed me a small steel key. "Vault 317, he whispered. "First National Trust, everything you need is there." I had almost forgotten about it in the whirlwind of funeral arrangements and legal proceedings. Almost. The burned check was never meant to be cashed. It was bait. A test. My father loved tests. That evening, I drove alone to First National Trust. The bank manager greeted me personally when I presented the key and identification. Within minutes, I was seated in a private room with a long, narrow safety deposit box placed before me. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the key. Inside was no stack of cash, no glittering jewels. There were 3 things. A thick leather-bound ledger. A sealed envelope labeled "For Daniel only." A slim black flash drive. I opened the envelope first. "Son, if you are reading this, the check is gone." I exhaled slowly. I left that check knowing it would cause tension. If you chose to deposit it immediately, I would know you learned nothing from me. If someone close to you destroyed it, I would know something far more important. My father always wrote like he was still lecturing me in his office. Whitmore Biotech's true value lies not in its current valuation, but in Project Helios. Project Helios. The board thought it had been scrapped years ago due to regulatory hurdles. Apparently not. The flash drive contains the full research archive and private investor agreements. The ledger contains off-ledger investments, trusts established under your name over the last 15 years. 15 years. I flipped open the ledger. Line after line of offshore accounts, strategic equity positions, quiet acquisitions in emerging biotech startups around the globe. My father hadn't left me $52 million. He had built a shadow empire worth 10 times that. And it was invisible to the board. Invisible to competitors. Invisible to everyone. Except me. When I came home, Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling on her phone. "You went to the bank," she said without looking up. "Yes. Too bad about the check." I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "You really believed burning it would fix something." "I believed it would stop you from becoming him." "And who was he?" "Cold, obsessed with power." I studied her face, the frustration, the fear underneath it. "You think I want power for its own sake?" She hesitated. "I think money changes people." "It does," I admitted, "but so does resentment." She flinched. I reached into my coat pocket and placed the flash drive on the table between us. "That check wasn't the inheritance." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "It was a distraction." Over the next few weeks, I brought Emily into everything. Not the board meetings, not yet. But the research labs. The philanthropic arm of the company she'd never cared to visit. The scholarships my father had funded quietly for underprivileged medical students. The experimental therapy trials for rare pediatric diseases. Project Helios wasn't just a revenue engine. It was a revolutionary gene editing platform with the potential to eliminate hereditary illnesses. My father had hidden it because competitors would have dismantled it for parts. Or worse, rushed it to market irresponsibly. "Why did Grandpa tell anyone?" Emily asked one afternoon as we stood in a secured lab watching scientists work. "Because the world isn't patient with miracles," I said. "It monetizes them." She was quiet. For the first time since the will reading, she looked uncertain instead of angry. "I thought he just cared about money." "He cared about control," I said, "so that breakthroughs wouldn't be destroyed by greed." She glanced at me. "Like I destroyed the check." "Yes." The word hung heavy between us. A month later, the board tried to force a vote. They'd heard whispers about Helios resurfacing. They wanted transparency. They wanted access. They wanted leverage. I walked into that meeting prepared. Emily sat behind me as an observer, technically allowed as a family shareholder. When the chairman leaned forward and said, "Daniel, we understand you've been pursuing unauthorized research initiatives," I didn't blink. "Project Helios is fully funded through private trusts," I said evenly, "established years ago." "By whom?" "My father." A ripple of tension moved around the table. "You'll need board approval to proceed." "No," I replied, "I won't." I slid copies of the ledger's certified documentation across the table. My father had structured the shadow holdings in a way that gave me majority voting control the moment certain triggers were met. The burn check had been one of them. If deposited, it would have consolidated assets differently. But because it was destroyed, a separate clause activated, one that transferred dormant shares into my direct control. Emily's breath caught softly behind me. The chairman's face drained of color as he scanned the documents. "You planned this?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "my father did." The vote never happened. Helios moved forward. Under my terms. That night, Emily stood in the doorway of my study. "I didn't know," she said. "I know." She stepped inside slowly. "You're not angry." I looked at her carefully. "I was," I admitted, "for about 10 seconds. And then I realized you weren't trying to hurt me." She swallowed. "I was scared." "Of becoming him?" "Yes." I closed the folder in front of me. Your grandfather wasn't perfect, but he wasn't a villain either, he just understood something you're still learning. What's that? That power isn't evil, it's neutral, it depends on who holds it. Tears shimmered in her eyes for the first time since the funeral. I thought burning that check would protect us. It did. She looked confused. It showed me you care more about who I am than what I inherit. Her voice broke slightly. I don't want $52 million. Good, I said softly, because that was never the real inheritance. 6 months later, Project Helios announced its first successful clinical trial. The stock surged. Media outlets scrambled to uncover how Whitmore Biotech had kept such a breakthrough secret. I declined interviews. Instead, I appointed a new director of ethical oversight. Emily. She had gone back to school to study bioethics after seeing Helios in action. You're sure? She asked nervously on her first day in the new office. I'm sure. This isn't charity. No, I said, it's responsibility. She glanced at the framed photo of my father I'd placed on her desk. Do you think he planned all of this? Yes. Even me burning the check. I smiled faintly. He planned for every possibility. Outside the office window, the city stretched endlessly, full of ambition, greed, hope, desperation. $52 million would have been a fortune. But it would have been small. What my father left behind wasn't money. It was leverage to shape the future. And what my daughter burned that night in the fireplace wasn't wealth. It was the illusion that wealth alone mattered. She thought she had destroyed my inheritance. What she really destroyed was my last excuse to keep her at a distance. The ashes in the fireplace had cleared something between us that money never could. And as I watched her step confidently into her new role, determined, principled, unafraid to challenge me, I realized something my father had known all along. The true inheritance wasn't the check. It wasn't even the company. It was the next generation strong enough to question it. And that was worth far more than $52 million.